My fellow member, Carlos Jimenez, who is 70 years old, and I guess he doesn't mind me saying that since he has put that information out there. There's video of him easily traversing the roof, walking across the roof, and even though he is some 50 years older than the shooter. And so my question is, do you agree with the assessment of the former Secret Service director that the roof was so sloped that it created safety concerns?
I can't agree with that statement, sir.
All right, thank you very much. I'm out of time and I yield back.
Gentleman yields. I now recognize Mr. Correa for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank you and the ranking member for putting together the trip to Butler yesterday. Good, eye-opening trip. And Colonel Paris, thank you for hosting us out there. I certainly hope that the Secret Service does cooperate with us in our investigation as to what went wrong. Secret Service has to be 100% correct all the time. There's small force, 2,300 plus maybe 1,300. So you local police officers are the force multiplier. And to hear you say that miscommunication was an element here is unacceptable. We talked earlier to the fact that FirstNet was put together post 9/11. It's a little bit over 20 years ago. And to hear that we still don't have the technology for people on the ground to talk with each other is of concern. It's even of greater concern to me when I was taking a tour of that farm in Butler, Pennsylvania yesterday. I had local law enforcement officers, local electeds coming to me, whispering to me, there's more here to the story. We need to talk about what actually happened. To have people that were on the ground there, concerned, afraid of stepping forward is unacceptable. To tell us of other failures that maybe this committee does not know about yet, that were part of what happened in Butler, Pennsylvania, is unacceptable. I asked one of the officers, safety officers, could you talk to the Secret Service? Said, no, we can't communicate. Took us 15 minutes to communicate with them. Local elected official who said, I have other stories that I need to talk to you about when you have a moment. Ladies and gentlemen, we're 4.5 months away from this election. Pennsylvania is a battleground state. You will have these kinds of events again. And to know that we don't have the facts, let alone execute a plan to fix the holes, is unacceptable to our democracy and to our country. We can talk about the facts. The facts are a lot of things went wrong. Let's talk about how to fix it. Fix it now. I think we start with accepting the fact that things went wrong and that we need more resources. Colonel Paris, your volunteers, your officers that you put on the line to help the Secret Service, are they actually compensated somewhere for their overtime, their extra time they're out there?
They're in a paid status, yes. They're not. We assign them to those duties, and if they incur overtime as a result of the contractual bargaining agreement, we pay them.
So let me ask you something in the minute and a half I have left. One of the local officers there, after we spoke a while, I said, well, let me summarize what you just told me. You're asking me who's in charge. And he asked me, yeah, I want to know who's in charge. I said, well, let's talk some more. And he said, Lou, we don't know if it's the campaign or the Secret Service that's in charge here. Said, if I called for a row of dump trucks to be put up behind the stand, it wouldn't happen because the optics would not be good for a campaign rally. I want to know who's in charge protecting our national candidates. And Mr. Chairman, I'd like to see if we can ask those tough questions. This is not a Democrat or Republican issue. This is about trying to come up with some rules, protocol to make sure this does not happen again. After the events, we can sit here, we can point fingers at each other and talk about partisanship. It's not going to fix our democracy or electoral system. Mr. Chairman, I do hope we go back and talk to a lot of those folks who are not here today, who wanted to talk, who weren't invited, and a lot of people, even if we invite them, are not going to talk. Because frankly speaking, they want to keep their heads down as the shooting continues. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield.
Gentleman yields. I now recognize Mr. Bishop for 5 minutes of.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Colonel Paris, are you aware whether any law enforcement officer or officers was or were posted in the second floor window of the AGR building?
I am aware, yes, sir.
And what is the answer?
To my knowledge, there were 2 posted there from Butler ESU.
And you said Butler ESU. What does the acronym ESU stand for?
Emergency Services Unit. It's a team that's comprised of multiple agencies that pool resources on a county or several county basis in order to enhance capabilities and training and be able to respond. Basically, a mutual aid agreement is my understanding of it.
Is it sort of like a SWAT team?
They are trained in SWAT tactics, to my knowledge.
So
yes.
how many ESU officers were posted to that second floor window?
So I am aware that 2 were in the building, but again, I have not seen the Secret Service operations plan.
Do you know, well, you say in the building. Were they in a window, where a window out onto the scene?
From briefings that I have been given, I was told they were in a window, yes, sir.
Did they remain on post?
I was told that at a certain point, they began searching along with other local officers in the immediacy after Crooks had been identified as suspicious by them.
By them?
My understanding is that they identified Crooks for not matriculating. He never, to my knowledge, Crooks never made it through the secure perimeter into the venue space itself. He was identified by those members as suspicious in part because of that. And then at some point, he produced the rangefinder, which heightened that suspicion.
So Representative Crane took a video on site yesterday. I'd like staff to put that up. It's just very short. There's a few seconds. They can do that. If I understand correctly, this is from the second story window of the AGR building. You can see that window comes out from the sash and swings out to the right. There's an aerial photo right after Crooks was killed, where Crooks's body's on the roof, and that window was open. Was it from this vantage point that those ESU officers spotted Crooks?
I don't know that particular window, but my understanding is from a second-story window is where he was initially spotted.
Okay, so are you then saying that, to your knowledge, those ESU officers left the location where they could look out the window to go in search of this person?
That is my understanding.
So sometime before the time between the time he was spotted on the ground and identified as someone suspicious until the shooting, they had left that post to go look for him. Is that what you're saying?
My understanding is yes, along with other municipal officers that responded to that area. And that's based on interviews that we've conducted, and I want to be very clear that I don't want to establish a timeline minute by minute because we don't have that yet.
I think that's revelatory. I haven't heard that information. I did hear before that and there's a local news station. Well, there's a local news station report from July 17 that says that local law enforcement were told they couldn't be responsible for securing the AGR building during the Trump rally. And of course, you've testified a moment ago or earlier in this hearing that it was your understanding that the meeting with the Secret Service on the site was that ESU was going to handle the AGR building. Which is it? Do you know?
My understanding is what my initial answer was.
Okay. You also, in response to Mr. McCall, you started to say something. You were saying that you did have integrated comms, and you were saying you were deferring to the ongoing investigation, but you have an understanding of the sequence, and then he cut you off and went on to another question. Do you know what you were about to say? Do you remember that?
Just that we had members of PSP inside of the Secret Service command post, and we were maintaining communication with our people.
Had ESU maintained position in that window overlooking the roof, isn't it true that they would have had a clean shot at at Mr. Crooks as he was ascending the roof to his shooting position?
I'm not prepared to say that because I don't know the exact timeline of events.
But it's your understanding, though, that they were no longer in that room where they had been previously overlooking the building at the time he was ascending the roof. Is that correct?
Could you repeat that question?
The ESU officers were no longer in that room where they could look out the window and oversee the roof as that video shows.
I believe they were actively searching along with additional municipal officers for Mr. Crooks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My time's expired.
Gentleman yields. I now recognize Mr. Carter.
Thank you, Mr.
For 5
Chairman.
minutes.
And thank you to our witnesses for joining us today as we convene to discuss the attempted assassination of former President Donald Trump and its profound implications on our nation's political landscape. It is imperative that we recognize the growing threats to our homeland. The failure of the Secret Service to protect former President Donald Trump must be thoroughly investigated and addressed to ensure such an incident never happens again. Violence has no place in political discourse, regardless of our philosophical differences, our parties, or our beliefs. We must stand united against such actions and uphold the principles of democracy and respect. What happened on that day was an incredible breach, a threat to our nation because one of our leaders were placed in harm's way. Secret Service has a principal role, and that is to provide protection for our party leaders, whether they're Republican, Democrat, or other. Rather, they are someone that we agree with or someone we disagree with. It's not a luxury. It's a necessity. It's an imperative. And while we all have lots of questions, it appears abundantly clear that the two of you, and while we appreciate you being here, own no responsibility to the breach. And I respect the fact that the questions that are coming to you are very difficult for you to answer because you have limited facts. But I do appreciate your presence. I appreciate your leadership. I appreciate what you do. And for all the men and women in uniform, we thank you for putting your lives on the line to protect us. I will ask this general question. If you were in charge, can you say what you might have done differently?
I would defer to the Secret Service from the standpoint that our expertise in the Pennsylvania State Police is not primarily focused on full-time dignitary protection, sir. I would endeavor generally to try and put whatever resources and partnerships in place to maintain and ensure the safest event we possibly could.
Do you believe that the coordination failed between agencies?
Again, I can only comment on the state police portion at this point. We continue to learn more 10 days in, and I have not seen the Secret Service operations plan, sir.
Mr. Yost, can you join us and share any light in your expertise on
Yes,
where we are and how can we make sure this absolutely never happens again, regardless of who might be at the podium? A president is a president is a president.
I could not agree with you more. In this situation, if I'm speaking on behalf of local law enforcement or state law enforcement, I would say that, again, the primary responsibility of making these calls, making these decisions, and making the operations plans is going to be the Secret Service. As I mentioned earlier, there are some 19,000 agencies across this country. It would be impossible to have any continuity or any consistency with what we do in protecting, our leaders. So Secret Service would have to play a huge role in this part. If you're asking me personally what I would have done different, well, obviously I look at an assessment of the situation and look at all of the elevated positions that were in place. They should have been part of a contained area. But that's just my own personal view of not seeing news reports and not physically being on site.
I have never served in any form of law enforcement, but I think I would have figured that that perimeter should have been tighter. I think I could have figured out that there's no way that that building where the shooter sat, laid, and aimed should not have had snipers on top of it as well, negating any opportunity for a shooter to be there. Notwithstanding that there should have been a sweep of the area, we should have had our people on that building as a point of view for our former president. And as I said, a president, a president, a president, a former president, a former president, former president, a cabinet secretary, a leader. We deserve to have answers to these questions, because when we don't have answers, those who would rather divide and create theater by saying things that aren't true and they know aren't true, distorting facts and trying to suggest that somehow people played an active role. Listen, the American people deserve the truth. And so I am imploring that we have somebody at these tables that can answer the questions, the good, the tough, the uncomfortable, the comfortable, because the American people deserve to know. This is something that should have never happened. And we as a committee, in a most bipartisan fashion, should stand together to make sure that we send a message always, that we will always protect our leaders, whether we agree with them or not. Mr. Chairman, I yield.
The gentleman yields. I now recognize the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Jimenez, for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Colonel Paris, you said the United States Secret Service, Penn State Police was there, Butler ESU was there. Any other law enforcement agency there?
According to the operations plan that PSP put together, there were elements from Butler County Sheriff. Deputy sheriffs were on some of those interior posts, and thus they were on our.
I just need the answer.
I apologize. There are the additional ones that I could name would be Butler County Sheriffs were in our operations plan. Pittsburgh City Police provided assets to the motorcade, and I believe Allegheny County Police also.
You said that you were in the Incident Command Center, that your agency was in the Incident Command Center with the Secret Service.
Yes, sir.
Were all the other agencies in that command center?
I believe that some of those agencies were represented, but I can't definitively tell you.
We need to find the answer to that. It was Butler ESU in that command center?
I was told at one point that there was a representative in there. How long and over what period, I'm not sure. I'm aware of 3.
So the agency that's in charge of the outside perimeter, actually the agency in charge of the greatest threat, because when you stand at the podium, and I stood there, and when you look, all you had to do is look around. There's the greatest threat right there. It's 100 yards away. It's elevated, direct line of fire to the president. I stood on that roof. No problem standing on that roof. And yes, I am 70 years old, okay? So the timeline is very important here. If, in fact, they thought that Mr. Brooks was so suspicious that they actually pulled the ESU counter snipers away, because there were counter snipers, what I understand, in that window, a way to look for him. And from what I understand the timeline, it's about 20 minutes before the president came out. Was that information relayed to the Secret Service, that they were looking for a suspicious individual and that people had been pulled away to look for that suspicious individual? Was that relayed to the Secret Service?
I believe that it was.
And was that relayed to the Secret Service, the team that surrounds the president himself?
I can't answer that.
Well, if it wasn't, that's another big mess up. And I can tell you, this is just one of a bunch of mess ups that I've seen. One of them, question that I have is, why in the world was that team from ESU in the building to begin with? Why weren't they on a rooftop? And it was a hot day, right? And so that's another question that I'm going to, why were you assigned inside a building when you have a little window, it's like this big, right? And your line of sight out of that window, unless you stick your head out of the window, is pretty limited, your view. So why were you inside and not outside? Who said for them to be inside and not outside? What did the Secret Service tell you were inside the perimeter, right?
Yes.
For the most part.
You're saying
You were
yes.
inside the perimeter.
Me personally, or the?
No, I'm saying your agency was inside
Yes.
the perimeter. But actually, the biggest threat was outside the perimeter. And so who developed a plan to protect the outside of the perimeter? There's only one agency. That's the United States Secret Service. Because you really can't ask the local agency to do that because they're not in the business of dignitary protection. They don't do it all the time. You don't do it all the time. They do it all the time. So, Mr. Chairman, we're going to need those other agencies to come in. We need a timeline, who said what to who, and what the action that was taken. You know, one thing that I noticed in another video, and I've got to find out if it's true, and it appears to be true, is that the snipers on the south side repositioned to look to the north side. And I want to know what the timeline for that was. How far in advance were the snipers, the counter snipers on the south side told, hey, you need to look at a threat on the north side? And how much time was there between that and then the shots being fired? Do you have any information on that?
I do not have a specific timeline.
Okay, and those are that's the information that we need. It's not unusual to have people on different frequencies. Actually, you have to because you have so many people, but you have to have everybody in the same place so they communicate with each other. So we need to know if everybody that was in charge or had responsibility for protecting not only the interior perimeter, but outside the perimeter, if they were all in that incident command center. And if they weren't, that's a huge problem too. Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields. I now recognize Mr. Magaziner for 5 minutes from Rhode Island.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And first, I just want to join my colleagues from both sides of the aisle earlier who recognized the tremendous legacy of our colleague, Sheila Jackson Lee, who, I feel very fortunate to have had even just a year and a half to work with on this committee. She always came prepared. She was diligent. She brought empathy and was a great example to us newer members. So I'm very grateful for her legacy, and I know it will live on for a long time to come. And I also join my colleagues on both sides in condemning the assassination attempt on former President Trump and condemn all acts of violence. Violence is not the answer. Our condolences go out to the family of Corey Comparator and all who were injured and traumatized by what occurred that day. And, I think about the children who were at that event and had to witness that. And that is something they will carry with them for the rest of their lives. We don't know the motivation of the shooter at this time, but I remain concerned by the rising tide of political violence and domestic violent extremism in this country, which impacts all of us. This is something that some of us have been talking about a lot in this committee. In 2023, the U.S. Capitol Police investigated more than 8,000 cases of direct threats against members of Congress, a tenfold increase from 2015. And so I ask everyone, take down the rhetoric, remove violent rhetoric from our political discourse. Remember, as President Lincoln said, that we are not enemies but friends, and we have to appeal to the better angels of our nature. And yes, we have to make sure that this never happens again. It is welcome news that the director of the Secret Service has resigned, but if we say that that is enough, then we're not doing our jobs. We need to understand what protocols, policies, resources need to be changed, if any, to make sure this does not happen again. Colonel, I wanted to ask, I imagine the Pennsylvania State Police deals with lots of events like this, right? You have lots of political events, big events, Secret Service protectees who come in and out of Pennsylvania. So can you just help us understand, is it unusual to have such a small perimeter around an outdoor event like this one?
I would say that we routinely, as a matter of course, exercise deference to the Secret Service to set the perimeter for an event like this based on the protectee.
Yeah, I think it's important to note that Pennsylvania is a state where anyone 18 and above can carry a firearm like an AR-15 without a license. It's an open carry state. And so my second question is, outside of that perimeter, were there any controls in place or any, legal tools that you had at your disposal if an individual with a firearm had been spotted, again, within 300, 400 yards of the former president?
I would defer to the Secret Service. I haven't seen their operations plan, sir.
Right, but you as state police and then also the Butler local police who were responsible for areas outside of the perimeter, if this individual had been spotted earlier with a firearm because it is an open carry state, what legal tools would you have had at your disposal?
So we would have responded and attempted to make contact and ascertain what the person was doing there and what their activity was.
Yeah. So a number of us have asked questions about lines of communication, and I think that's important, right? Because to the layperson at home, what we're trying to understand is if this individual was spotted on the roof, as he appears to have been well over a minute before the shooting, did the local officers who spotted him know how to radio into the command center? Was that information relayed? And then was it in turn relayed to the Secret Service? This question has been asked a few different times, but can you tell the public what you know about whether local officers outside the perimeter knew how to radio in a suspected threat, whether there was an individual in the command center who was receiving those calls and communicating them to the Secret Service?
So I do know that Butler County set up a command post on the site itself, along with the Secret Service's command post, but they were not located in the same building. The exact communication between municipal officers and that command post or the county dispatch that they would rely on. The state police have our own statewide dispatching. We can communicate with the dispatching centers telephonically and through electronic means, but we maintain separate dispatching systems, so I would defer to.
So the locals were not included in the Secret Service command center. The state police was or was not?
The PSP, I can assure you the PSP was in there.
Yeah.
Additional people, I was briefed on one occasion that there was a representative from Butler ESU that was in there. When they were in there and the length is not really a focus at this point of our investigation into the homicide and the attempted 2 homicides, as well as the officer-involved shooting. So that sequence of events has come up pursuant to us investigating that, but I am very remiss to give you a minute-by-minute timeline and what the communications were.
Thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman yields. I now recognize Mr. Pfluger for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My deepest sympathies to the family of Sheila Jackson Lee. We worked very closely together on many things, and she was an excellent member of this committee. I agree with my colleague, Mr. Carter, when he talked about Americans deserve the truth. I absolutely agree with that, and also Mr. Magaziner talking about Republicans and Democrats working together on the oversight. Imagine if we worked together, the transparency that we could have on so many other issues that are going on right now, and I believe that that is possible for us to do. Thank you both for being here. Colonel Paris, was it clear to you, when we talk about rules of engagement, deconfliction plans, the assignments of which law enforcement agency will cover which section, did you have concerns prior to the president coming on stage? And if so, did you voice those concerns to the Secret Service?
So just to be clear, I was not present at the venue on July 13th.
But in the planning and the lead up,
Planning, my default position would be that our commanders are aware of what their responsibilities are within a unified command structure reporting to the Secret Service.
And do you believe that it was absolutely clear that there were 0 questions of who was supposed to cover what areas of the venue?
I can only comment to our responsibilities, and I believe our responsibilities were delineated to us, and I believe we met or exceeded those responsibilities based on everything that I know as I sit here 10 days in.
I think there's still a lot of questions regarding the plan,
Agreed.
And this is always, in any sort of protection assignment, that's always the hardest thing. Who are friendly assets? Who could be a vulnerable hostile actor? Who displays hostile intent, hostile act? I think it's clear there was a failure, and we definitely want to get to the bottom of it. President Yost, do you get the impression that Secret Service, at any point in the run-up to this or other events, has been stretched thin when it comes to just the work hours that they are putting in, the resources that they have? Was that communicated in any way?
Well, I can't speak directly to that. I can tell you that law enforcement across this country is stretched thin, just simply due to the inability to be able to attract the best and the brightest at any levels in order to maintain the staffing levels we need. So if that is the case, and we're not meeting those levels in Secret Service because of our inability to be able to recruit, then we need to address that. Or if it's the alignment of assets and the assignment of individuals, then that in itself is something as well, and it's something I'm not in a position to be able to speak about, other than to recognize that there's two huge factors here that need to be addressed.
Well, it's clear that that's the case, and God bless both of you for what you do, for the hours that you put in to protect our communities, and we can't do it without you, and we need you, and we will continue to advocate for you. I want to talk about now, that leads me into this next question. There's a piece of legislation, H.R. 8081, called the Disgraced Act. It says, denying infinite security and government resources allocated towards convicted and extremely dishonorable former protectees act, which is a whole mouthful of basically taking details away from people that could include those who are convicted. Talk to me about the impact if former President Trump didn't have a protective detail of U.S. Secret Service there. Talk to me about the impact on state and local partners to protect them in any of the communities that you represent. And by the way, he also was responsible for taking out al-Baghdadi, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, and Qasem Soleimani, and the Iranian government wants to do harm to him and other people like him. So what's the impact if you don't have Secret Service help?
More than happy to yield. So I think, we're trying not to become very political in this. I think we have a president of the United States who has, by simple virtue of his position, having served as president, that deserves a certain protection because of his service to the country. So the rest of these things are all things that are not for me to decide, other than to tell you that I think we have a responsibility to our leaders.
This is not political. That's not political. He deserves protection. You're absolutely right.
I agree.
Colonel Paris?
I would just echo that my understanding is it's a federal statute that creates the Secret Service and tasks them with those responsibilities. So to contemplate a different paradigm, I would reflect back to the legislature to contemplate
If
something.
he was denied a protective detail in Pennsylvania this past week, the weekend prior, what would that have done to your local resources to protect him adequately?
I think the removal of any resource inherently makes the burden on the surrounding resources that would have been committed somewhat additional.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields. Point of order.
Point of order.
Gentleman's recognized.
So I appreciate the gentleman's questions, but let me put it another way to the witnesses. The reference legislation.
Mr. Ranking Member, I mean, a question to the witness would be someone yielding to you. A point of order, I'm allowing you to make a point of order.
Thank you. Well, the point of order is, if you read the bill, it says that if you are a convicted felon and found and sentenced by a judge,
Mr. Chairman.
then you would not be, that's my point of order, that you would not have service. You have to be a convicted felon and sentenced. Now, at the time the bill was filed, nobody who was a protectee was a convicted felon. But if those who are lawyers here know that once you are a convicted felon and sentenced, you are remanded the custody of that particular law enforcement agency for custody. I think it's an anomaly to try to say that the Secret Service would have to protect a felon in jail, a convicted felon. So this whole notion about my legislation, I just say to the gentleman, if you read it, it says you have to be a convicted felon and sentenced. Now, we're not there. The conjecture, you can do whatever you want. But let me be clear about the bill. Republicans have made a lot of hay about the bill, saying it's about former President Trump and would take away his security. That just is not true. The bill doesn't mention former Trump, President Trump, and it would not have affected security at this tragic event. The bill talks about any Secret Service protectee who is convicted of a felony and sentenced to serve jail time, and it does not take away security. The bill makes clear that when a protectee is sentenced and remanded to the custody of prison officials, the Secret Service is able to hand off the prisoner in an orderly fashion, and that Secret Service agents aren't forced to become correctional officers too. That's the legislation. That's all it says. For the record, we can go back to.
The gentleman will need to get to his point of order.
Well, point of order is, the line of question is inconsistent with the legislation. And it does not say on that day, former President Trump would have been without Secret Service protection. He is not sentenced. If he's not sentenced, he will still have the protection. Plain and simple.
So you yield on your point of order, Mr. Ranking Member? You did, okay. I want to make a point of order then as well. And, you know, a lot of times we hear from both sides of the aisle about rhetoric and how rhetoric and the things we do in messaging bills that we do shapes discussion, impacts people. And first, my point of order is prison isn't necessarily a safer place. You can ask Mr. Epstein's family about that. And so to suggest that somehow he'd have the security necessary in a prison, I think is just not an accurate statement. In terms of, you know, I agree with the ranking member that his bill did say that it would not apply in this particular case, but, you know, it's more about what we're doing and what we're saying at certain times that generates the attitude in our society. And so I just make that point of order about this particular legislation. I made in my opening remarks a request that he would draw the bill.
You just have a second? I just want to make a quick comment. I think the chairman was clear that this bill was filed well in advance. So to connect, you mentioned timing. It's important to mention timing, that it wasn't.
Well, we don't want to debate the bill. We're here to hear from witnesses that are here. So I'm going to go ahead and end this now, and we're going to move on.